Rubicon of mass assassination, he publicly declared his actions above the law. The pseudoscience of eugenics, the dogma of German racial superiority, and the theoretical subhuman level of other races was the rationale for wars of annihilation. Hitler's plan was to depopulate vast regions of the East and replace them with Germanic stock. Lebensraum, or living space, was the key phrase. 10 million Jews came under their geographical control, of which 6 million were systematically murdered in an effort to wipe out the Jewish race. 3 million others perished in the camps, including gypsies, Slavs, and other supposed subhuman races, as well as homosexuals, dissident Catholic priests, prisoners of war, union leaders, political opponents, Germans caught aiding Jews, religious sects such as Jehovah's Witnesses, and the intellectuals of conquered nations. The concentration camp of Auschwitz processed 4,756 human beings a day. The Nazi propaganda was so irresistible that many Jews and other targeted groups joined the Nazi movement. In the aftermath of the war, 50 million people had died, and Europe lay in ashes. The Allies wanted answers. How had arguably the most civilized and technologically advanced nation on earth descended into the pit of hell? Who were these men? Were they madmen? Worst of all, if it could happen there, could it happen here? The psychiatrists that studied the prisoners at the Nuremberg trials wrote their collective portrait. Their collective IQ is 140. They have a rigid view of the world, black and white without gray. They were born followers who needed someone to tell them what to think. Though they had unusual personalities among them, they were not insane. The answers the Allies received were not the answers they were prepared to hear. No, they were not madmen, and yes, it could happen here. The psychiatrists noted that there were plenty of similar individuals in the United States who would gladly step over half the bodies of their fellow countrymen to control the remainder. Remote viewing programs were publicly touted as an attempt to spy on the USSR using psychic powers to find hidden Russian bases and gather intelligence information. The military intelligence personalities involved in remote viewing have ties to development programs for microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons that are designed to influence the central nervous system, referred to collectively as psychotronics. These personalities have ties to religious cults as well. Remote viewing began with Operation Scanate and Operation Grill Flame, run by the NSA and INSCOM at Fort Meade under such personalities as Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden, Albert Stubblebine, Ingo Swann, Ed Dames, Harold Putoff, Russell Targ, Paul Smith, and others. Operation Scanate leader Thomas Bearden went on to lead the American Psychotronics Association. Project Grill Flame leaders Ed Dames and Albert Stubblebine began Scitech Corporation, a private remote viewing company which holds the Smirnov patent for a psychotronic weapon. Remote viewers Harold Putoff and Ed Dames have counseled the traumatized victims of death cults and mass shootings such as the Jonestown mass deaths and the Columbine shootings, even though these men are not counselors, but physicists and military intelligence officers by training. Dr. Harold Putoff exemplifies the contradiction. He is a former NSA officer who developed the pulse microwave laser. He is a remote viewer and a high-level Scientologist who likes to counsel traumatized victims of cults. The concept of remote viewing is being used as a cover, a psychological warfare operation, in order to screen the development of psychotronic weapons and conduct MKUltra operations. The same people involved in remote viewing programs for the NSA and INSCOM at Fort Meade and Scitech Corporation are also closely tied to psychotronic weapons development and religious cults that use MKUltra methodology to induce multiple personality disorder. These strange threads, such as non-lethal psychotronic weapons development, remote viewing operations, and cults engaged in ritual abuse are all woven together, suggesting that MKUltra and non-lethal psychotronic weapons development have evolved into an elaborate psychological warfare campaign that functions as an infiltration operation and a counterinsurgency aimed at the people and government of the United States. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program, primarily run by the FBI as a covert action program against domestic dissidents. The use of infiltration, psychological warfare, harassment through the legal system, and the use of extralegal force and violence, including murder, probably began in the 1950s and is now a permanent feature of U.S. government. Targets included the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, opposition political parties, and basically any progressive group in American society. The Senate and congressional hearings into the activities of the FBI and CIA were crushed. The Senate committee's report was edited by the agencies being investigated before its publication. The House committee's report, including an account of FBI and CIA obstruction of its inquiry, was suppressed altogether. Senator Church and Congressman Pike, the committee chairs, were both targeted in their re-election campaigns by the intelligence agencies and defeated, their careers destroyed. The Freedom of Information Act did open up access to FBI documents, and lawsuits forced the release of some COINTELPRO files to the media, but the most important files were withheld or destroyed, and former operatives report that the most heinous crimes were never committed to writing. William C. Sullivan, who ran the COINTEL program in the 1960s, was killed in a 1977 hunting accident shortly before giving testimony to a grand jury in 1977. The only two FBI officials who were ever prosecuted for COINTELPRO crimes were quickly pardoned by President Ford. There was an appearance of reform that was largely aimed at placating a weary public that had become disillusioned after Watergate. The most prominent target of COINTELPRO in the 1960s was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who received a blackmail letter from J. Edgar Hoover that detailed the existence of Dr. King's extramarital affairs and suggested he should suicide himself to preclude the release of the material to the press and its negative effect on his family and his movement. The surveillance of Dr. King included the 112th Military Intelligence Unit and even the use of U-2 spy planes to take photographs. Dr. King was marked, barely a month before his murder, for elimination as a potential messiah who could unify and electrify the black movement. The FBI planned to replace him, quote, in his role of the leadership of the Negro people, with conservative black lawyer Samuel Pierce, who was later named to Ronald Reagan's cabinet. The theme of forced suicide is repeated on others targeted by COINTELPRO. Jean Seberg was an actress involved in civil rights. Her husband received a forged letter from the FBI detailing a fictitious affair she was supposedly having with a black activist. The actress was pregnant at the time and attempted suicide, had a miscarriage, and eventually did commit suicide. Forced suicide on a COINTELPRO target allows intelligence agencies deniability for the crime. In effect, it is the perfect crime. A total of 2,300 officially approved COINTEL actions were admitted to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but thousands more have since been revealed. Ultimately, FBI documents disclose